Hi, it's Hazel, and welcome to my channel, Hazel and Aka Design. This is going to be a quick video, and I'm going to be putting it under the category of Follow-Up Friday. And that hashtag, actually, the first time I ever heard it was from Kim Newberg. And essentially, it's a way to get back to you and show you what has transpired, some of the projects that maybe needed drying time or sewing time or whatever, to see how they actually turned out. Now, you may remember that I had a kind of a mini series going on about using fabric, and I had done 4 journal covers using vintage bedding, and I shouldn't, well, let's just say that before this video before this video appears, I will make sure that I have listed those bundles. Probably, I would say probably in my Etsy shop. Excuse me. So, just as a very short recap, as I said, these are vintage bed sheets and pillowcases. Some of, like, when people talk about new old stock, well, most of this had never been out of its packaging. I was the one, decades later, to crack open the seal on those bags. So basically, I had tacked down the fabric using my Yoo-Hoo glue stick to a piece of coordinating cardstock, and then stitched around to add a bit more interest and also to ensure that the edges didn't lift. Now, I left the option open when I'd stitched around with a straight stitch. I left the option open thinking that, I could also do some slow stitching. Well, let's face it, it's summer, or it was summer, and that is not likely to happen when I have so many other things on my plate. So then I thought, well, okay, let's take the next step and do something on the inside. So I also have a plethora of scrapbook paper. So what I did was I found, so I had 2 excuse me, 2 pink covers, 2 blue covers. So I just found a couple different sheets of pink and blue scrapbook paper. Randomly chose one because these covers are 9 by 12. I didn't even have to trim in most cases. Glued it down using, my glue stick again. Left it to dry overnight, and then thought, okay, now I'm going to zigzag around. And I could have used the matching paper to create a pocket, but then I thought, hey, I'm so daring, I'm so bold, I'm so brave. Why don't I mix some patterns? Clearly there's this patchwork effect happening on this side, so let's throw a few more patterns at this. So the thing to remember, the thing that I had to be aware of is, that I have said before that I always start sewing my signature or sewing journal covers at the center bottom spot, because I feel that that's the most inconspicuous spot. If a person chooses, and that's where I start and finish, and backstitch and so on. If a person, once this is folded and becomes a journal cover, maybe an additional piece of lace or fabric or paper or whatever will be added, so it disguises it even more. Also, choosing a thread color that is closest to whatever it is you're sewing also acts as camouflage and also mitigates any sloppy sewing that may result. And I should say too that anybody who is a real fine fashion designer, seamstress, tailor, whatever, is likely not making journals. I think that's a fairly safe bet, because I think people like that have a precision and a performance level that they've set for themselves that just would be frustrated by journal projects. And in fairness to each of us who is sewing a variety of sizes, shapes, and surfaces, it would be impossible to have our sewing turn out perfectly, even if that was our goal, which it isn't. So for instance, and here I'm going to talk about math. I don't know if math is the right word, but every machine is different. Stitch lengths are, usually set by a dial of some sort. Now, is that dial precisely where you sewed it the last project? And if the stitch length worked out perfectly on a journal, on a teeny tiny tag, or on a big journal card, it's not going to work out mathematically on something of a different size. So that's why quite often I am manually readjusting, by lifting the needle and reinserting it where I want it to be at the corners before I pivot, if I think that it's going to not be where I want it to be. And I suppose if anyone looked hard enough, maybe they could tell where that happened. But it is what it is. We are creating handmade things. And I think all you have to do is look at some of the ready-made stuff in our lives, ready-made clothing, to find out that there's not a lot of precision happening there either. We're kind of living in a throwaway society. And a lot of that stuff is fast fashion, wear it a season or two, throw it out because it's pilling or it's whatever. So that's my little spiel on that. Now I told you that I straight stitched around these covers. If it were to really bug you that, I've got a straight stitch and now I've got a zigzag, well, I think you have a few choices. Number one, you could suck it up and ignore that feeling. Push it down. You could repeat whatever it is you had used before. So if you had a straight stitch before, use a second row of straight stitching. Or maybe you have 5 options. If you had a zigzag stitch initially, do another zigzag stitch. If you could trust the glue and, think that nothing is ever going to happen, or you could add a trim, a fiber, lace, eyelet, whatever you choose. So, this is how it looks. Now maybe you can, depending how the light is hitting this, maybe you can see that there were those stitch lines. Again, I'm not overly concerned about that, because anyone who is using their heads at all will know that this is a constructed project, and there will be enough other beautiful stuff going on that there would be a distraction from that. Now, probably it was this one, I guess. This was the first one I had done, and I forgot that I should have been sewing with this side up. So the stitches are they look better on the inside than they do on the outside. Again, not the end of the world for all the reasons I've already discussed. I needn't have worried about, I better stitch on this side so I can see what's happening with this pocket that I've attached, because what I had done was a thin bead of art glitter glue on each side and a little strip in the middle. So it wasn't going to go anywhere. I should also say, I should say 2 things. When you are using, fibers and you don't and there are a variety of compositions. Like, in other words, the makeup of the fiber could be anything. It could be cotton, it could be cotton, polycotton, it could be something more sheer, something more satiny, something that ravels. You can expect that you will be either learning to love the little things that extend beyond, the little threads, the little fibers, or you're going to be spending, time snipping. Again, how much this bothers you, or if it bothers you, is a matter of personal taste. You just want to make sure that you're not accidentally cutting into your zigzag stitches if they've gone around the edge. The other thing I should say is that once I slathered this with glue, I also had this remainder piece of paper. So I stuck the paper and the cover under, well, I'm calling it a blotter for lack of a better word, but essentially just my cutting mat here, because I wanted it to dry nice and flat. Because we know that if we wet one side of something and the other side is dry, they're going to tend to it'll curl, because there's not the same amount of moisture on either side. So this morning, when I checked on them, they felt slightly damp. They felt a little bit moist, and I guess that's because that moisture was trapped under my cutting mat. So it didn't do any harm as far as I can tell, but I just thought that was an interesting observation. So what am I going to do now? Well, I'm going to gently, and I don't know what that might do to these pockets, because again, this is cloth, this is paper, this is paper. I'm going to gently fold these covers to begin training them to close. Now, back in the day when I was less experienced, I would have folded that down and I would have, burnished it, and I would have made a sharp crease. Well, let's just say that can create some issues when it comes time to sew in signatures. Now, chances are I would only put one bigger signature into a cover like this. But if it were maybe a solid colored fabric, something where that fold is going to show very much, that can cause some issues. Let me just clip while I'm talking. That could cause some issues, because what if when you've gone to sew in your signatures, what if it isn't really perfect? And then you've got, your line of stitching and your heavily creased fold in not lining up. So, that's when you need another one of those. You've come to a fork in the road. Do you cover that up to disguise that fact? Or do you learn to love it, like ignore it and learn to love it? Or do you not care at all? So, it's all about choices. So this is what I will do to the four. Now I might gently press a little more, now that I know that these edges are not going anywhere. Might gently, bend this a little more, but again, not do the sharp fold that I would have done in the past. It is kind of good to know where the fold is, to be honest, because it's going to help determine the actual width of the pages that will fit in here nicely, and make it easier to find that mark when you're making your holes. Now, with one signature, you also have the option of just using, you know, a ruler, a centering ruler, and making your, let's open this baby up and see what's happening to that pocket. So it is bagging out a little bit. Now, again, I'm not going to worry about that till the time comes. Like, there's enough to worry about without anticipating problems. We know, I've talked about it in the past, and I didn't invent it, that sometimes when I'm sewing or adding pockets, I saw someone, and I've forgotten who, just kind of run a bone folder, and that's assuming that I'm gluing. Say this was a glued thing. Kind of run a bone folder or some other thing with a little bit of thickness to it underneath to kind of almost stretch the paper while that glue is setting to make it a less tight-fitting pocket. So, but back to finding the center. Oh, so, well, let me finish, I guess, this other thought. So if at the time the signature gets sewn in, it may be that this is just perfect for stuffing. Or maybe it's going to need some remedial action. So at that time, a person could still cut down here because there's nothing holding it there. And then glue, if you like a nice flat pocket, you could glue it wherever. So, you know, you could cut it, you could make it as narrow or as wide as you want. So I'm not concerned about that at this particular time. Oh, centering. So I would, this is 12 inches, but if it was like a weird number that is not easily divisible by 2, you would use your centering ruler to find out where is the center of this. And I would do that in about 3 places, make a tiny little pencil mark so that when it comes time to make my holes for my signature, I know that I am centered on the paper and not, you know, going cockeyed or crooked. So I have, because I thrifted a bunch of these clips, I will just use these to sort of help this learn to stay in that position. I don't have anything more to say about these other than I did obviously alternate, you know, mix up the papers so that I had a bit of variety going. So I will do the folding and the clipping after the video. Now, the other thing that I had done recently was, again, in an effort to use some fussy cuts, to use some vintage magazine fussy cuts, not that it matters what kind they are, and fabric scraps and packaging or cardboard scraps. I had done a video on making these oversized, well, yet to be determined journal elements. So they're all, well, maybe with the exception of this one, they're all kind of too tall for a traditional 8.5 or 9-inch journal. They could questionably be, okay, this is 4 1/4. So this would be a tough go, even in a tall skinny, unless the cover was a bit oversized, which it could be if you're making it from scratch. However, this could also be a flip. Now, I showed you in that video that this was just the back of a coloring book calendar. So this is fine just the way it is. So this could also become a flip in a journal. And you will, if you saw that video, remember that I had the issue of the little holes that mysteriously appeared. That is where I would be putting a label or some other embellishment. And it should also be noted that none of these are completed as they are. They're just really quite far along in terms of being ready for some final decoration. I used the longest stitch possible on my machine. I just did a straight stitch, and again you can see there's a bit of fraying there. I will work at that as I see it happening. I've said that I'll put something there, and who knows, I may just leave it as is because it's pretty attractive as is, and there's a lot already happening. You will be relieved to know that I was able to get this girl on the waiting list for a hip replacement. And I've made a couple of chiropractor appointments because obviously no spine should bend that way. In the case of each of these, I just used my Yoo-Hoo stick. Now this is just almost like newsprint. Well, it's old and it's thin paper. So of course, you spread your glue from the inside out to sort of stabilize. Now these scrawny little chicken legs that these girls have, because the paper is thin and now wet, it just curls up something fierce. So it was a bit of a trick positioning these, but I knew I didn't want to cut off any feet, so I basically started at the bottom and let these toes, make sure the toes were intact, knowing that I had already planned for a wee bit of space at the top so that no haircuts or decapitations would be needed. So that's how I got these things down. And this is like a Tina Shabby Dabby Doodah thing. She's forever using a dry wipe. So I just really applied a lot of pressure to make sure that, it's stuck. And I think that they stuck remarkably well. And I don't know if that's because the paper was so very thin, that maybe because it was going onto fabric, or a combination of the two things. Now on this one, I chose to use black thread because I thought it would be least conspicuous. You remember her toe was cut off. Looks like I have to do a little trimmeruno there. This also shows you that I always, on tags and journal cards and so on, start at the bottom right-hand corner typically, do a few stitches, turn the corner, and then end up there again by back stitching a couple of times. So this is how this girl ended up. She clearly needs more. In the last video, I talked about the possibility of adding some selective bit of sort of pencil crayon or something to. But again, I'm not making that decision until I know where it's going. And this one, you had seen her glued down, again, positioned because of the elbow being missing. And I left this little fringy bit at the top. Now, the last thing I want to say is that between these journal covers, okay, I had purple thread in my sewing machine. So I had to change colors. So I picked blue first. And I did the two blue covers. And I did the light blue. It was all the same blue around all of these three things. Then I had to switch to a light pink. And I did these two covers. And then I switched to black. And black is what is left in the sewing machine. Now, we know that filling bobbins and switching thread, spools of thread and switching bobbins, it takes a minute. Where did I hide those girls? Where did I lose them? Oh, here they are. Might as well keep the life forms at the top here where you can see them. That takes time. I wanted to just briefly show you how I save a bit of time. Well, I guess, okay, let me back up for a second. I could save even more time, and I think some people do this, by deciding that no matter what, I'm either going to use black or white, or I've heard people using gray, or, you know, a tan colored thread, and that's all they ever worry about. Well, number one, I like color more than that. And I also believe, as I said, sometimes you want the camouflage, but I also believe that I have many, many, many spools of thread. I had my own thread long before I ever started making journals. I then inherited thread from my mom and my aunt, as well as every time I buy a sewing basket or a sewing machine and cabinet, let's say, I get more thread. So I'm going to use that thread. So what I wanted to show you is how I store my bobbins. Now, I was lucky enough to thrift, and maybe I thrifted it because that's broken. One hinge is broken. These sorts of boxes, and they hold, let's see, 5 by 5, 25 spools, or not spools, bobbins. This one is an open style, 3, 6, 7, so 21 there. Not all of them are full, and you can also see that I have a variety of bobbins. So I have these pink ones, don't know who made those. I have these that are quite rounded. I think these are probably the worst. They seem to be kind of a loose fit in my sewing machine. And then, of course, I have these straight-edged ones in the clear color. I like the fact that if I'm going to sew something, if I'm going to pick a color, typically I'm going to fill a bobbin. And that's why you see different amounts of thread on bobbins, because, you know, they've been used. And now it kind of annoys me with all these little tails, but there is no solution for that I'm aware of. So it's just a matter of, again, sucking it up and accepting it, and kind of rewinding them every so often. But I like to be able to just, if I, like this morning when I was sewing those things, to whip open these boxes and say, okay, that's close enough. Let's see if I can find a spool that it came off. And again, because it's impossible for people to see both sides of the same object at the same time, you can easily cheat and have something, you know, close enough will be acceptable. You will see that I have a number of black ones filled. I think that's navy. I think that's why I stuck it over there. A number of black and white or black and off-white filled and ready to go. I also tend to have a couple of loose bobbins on the table adjacent to where I sew, because you know, that's probably used most often. Now, is something as sloppily wound as this going to cause a problem? It might. I don't know what happened there. maybe I hadn't threaded it properly. And I've just filled all the spaces, even with empty ones, so that I know that, okay, in this color palette, I've got room to add more colors if and when the occasion arises. So I typically just keep these stacked up near me. Now, is this the perfect solution for bobbins? I don't know. I guess I kind of wish that this had a cover because it makes stacking a little easier. I kind of wish that, you know, maybe I had a third and fourth one of this style because it would stack better than this. But honestly, beggars, well, thrifters and beggars can't be choosers unless, of course, you're willing to pay full retail to get what you want. And frankly, I'm not prepared to pay full retail to get what I want. I will adapt, accommodate, forgive, and accept these kinds of situations because I also have that warm glow that I didn't pay full retail, that I saved some money in the process. I got something out of a thrift store or a garage sale or wherever, and it's working for me. Now, if at some point I found more of these, I would probably then donate or sell or whatever a surplus one like this because, you know, frankly, there is something to be said for uniformity. Am I ever going to have a studio or a setup where everything is perfectly matched? Like some people, and again, this isn't a criticism, it's just an observation. Some people have everything so perfectly matched, coordinated, laid out where, you know, they will buy 25 containers so that they are sure that they have exactly the right number. Well, that's not what I do. I buy, and you'll see some of that in an upcoming thrifting video, that I buy what I think I can use, and maybe that's why I have a million containers of a variety of sizes, colors, shapes, composition. If I have to buy new, I buy as many as I think seems reasonable at the time. Like, I remember when Dollarama was selling those clear bins with the cover, you know, the 4 little things that hold the cover down. And I thought, oh, I think 12, maybe about 12 or whatever number I decided on. That's going to be good. Well, of course, I could probably use, excuse me, I could probably use double that. But there has to be some rhyme or reason, some limits to what a person does. So I'm not trying to convince you that my way is right or my way is the only way, because that is definitely not the truth. I think you have to examine your own values, belief system, and aesthetics to decide, I'm going to either buy stuff once, I'm going to pay whatever I need to pay to get it all uniform and matching. I'm then going to use my label maker and I'm going to have uniform labels on everything. That is one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is to make do with what you had before you got into this crafting, journal making scenario, plus whatever acquisitions you've made since then. I don't know which is right. I don't know which is, I guess I've decided what's right for me, and you need to decide what is right for you. And I don't even know why I'm talking about this, to be honest. It's probably self-evident. I think that because I have chosen, made the choice that I made, because I had a lot of things before I even began, I think that that's why I keep searching for and changing what I put where and how it all works for me. I'm not prepared to throw the baby out with the bathwater and begin again with all new stuff and, emptying out the studio, taking every single item out of here and starting with a clean slate. Frankly, I think I'm too old. I don't want to give up a couple of weeks or maybe longer, or maybe a month of my life to make that happen, because frankly, it's not that important to me. If you are in the position where you are lucky enough to be starting with a blank slate, a brand new space, maybe the last birdie has finally left the nest and you're not turning their room into a shrine, but you're finally, like that commercial that used to be on air, you're finally turning that space into your own sanctuary, haven, workspace, sweatshop. And you're starting with a new coat of paint, and however you're furnishing it, then I love it. I'm so happy for you. I'm not in that position, and so I've chosen to make what I have work and to be content with this, because frankly, as Tony Robbins would say, life is a matter of, how we decide and how we live is a choice of pursuing pain. Pursuing pain. Oh dear. Pursuing pleasure or avoiding pain. So, yes, there could be the pursuit of pleasure in having a perfectly beautiful magazine spread worthy space, or that's seeking pleasure, avoiding the pain of having to make that happen by doing that month's worth of work to make that happen. So before I paint myself into a corner, let me stop and just say, I hope that you have enjoyed seeing how these things got taken to the next level. Now, in case I was ever short of covers, which I'm not, one day I should just blow your minds and show you all the covers I have ready to use. So now you've seen what the next steps are with these. And of course, they all will require further decoration, further embellishing. A journal topper, a focal point, more trim, lace, ribbon, whatever. But that decision is obviously made once you know what that project is going to be. And hopefully you have now gotten a look at how I save a bit of time in the craft room. Well, save at one point, but spend time at another. If you're watching TV, if you are in a bit of a funk and don't know what to do, you can while away the hours filling bobbins. It's a wee bit satisfying, let's just say that. Anyway, let me stop there, and you get to work and me get to work, and let's create something gorgeous. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.